We are back live in perhaps the slowest time of year in college basketball, post NBA draft, pre pretty much everything else. The only basketball that I was personally exposed to today was a couple of tweets from Northwestern basketball's page about Aaron Falzone playing in the FIBA World Cup for small countries for the Maltese national team, the country of Malta. But otherwise, pretty quiet in the basketball world. A few weeks before we really get some summer workout information that can be useful. A few more weeks before international trips and things get underway. So, Brad, I know hoop heads like us, it's a tough time of year. How you managing it, my friend?
I've been kind of bored. I mean, summer league starts I think July 2nd, and then we have free agency I think July 1st. So any piece of news at this point is a big news, which you guys will see when we get to some of our topics later in the show about certain players committing. You know, a June 26th commitment is huge news, even when the player is ranked like 300th.
Yeah, that's kind of exactly my thoughts, and I wrote a article today over on my website for like the first time in ever about just ranking some transfers that are out there. There's still some pretty talented guys on the board, so feel free to give that a look if anyone cares to read it. It's done pretty well so far, so thanks to y'all for those clicks. But let's get right into it, Brad. I think the biggest story of the past week and a half of college basketball, just because we had the draft hanging over our heads that kind of drew us away from college itself, has to be Kentucky and what they've continued to do in building their roster. And that roster really got filled out over the last week and a half, confirming that Ashton Hagans, the five-star point guard, would be reclassifying ahead to Kentucky in 2018, along with the expected commitment of Reid Travis that went official this past week as well. Reid Travis, obviously the Stanford grad transfer, averaged about 20 points and 8 rebounds a game. So, I mean, first of all, your reactions to the news, Brad. I mean, neither of these were particularly surprising, but together they certainly present this team as dangerous as anyone in the country.
Yeah, I was kind of hoping that Travis would go to Villanova just because a lot of the Kentucky media just thought it was such a foregone conclusion, and it turned out it was such a foregone conclusion. But, they were speaking so confidently about if and when Travis was joining the lineup, and I think with Travis, I think Kentucky is probably worthy of a consensus number one ranking. Now they're not being ranked that way right now. I think that this is clearly the top team, but I found 18 of these early top 25 polls. Most of them, I think, have been updated with the recent Kentucky roster news, but only 3 of the 16, actually, it's 16 polls. Only 3 of them have Kentucky number 1. 10 still have Kansas number 1, and 3 have Gonzaga. So that's just something really interesting to note that a lot of people still think that Kansas is the superior team, but when I look at this Kentucky team with Travis and now Hagans too, they're the clear number 1 for me.
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the things I tweeted right after Travis popped to Kentucky and everyone started the hype train was that, to me, the move didn't necessarily make a huge impact in how I saw them. Now, obviously, when you add a player of Reid Travis's caliber, you're a better team, and they're a better team the day after Reid Travis committed than they were the day before. But at the same time, I think there's a certain similarity between him and PJ Washington. I don't particularly think you want Reid Travis and PJ Washington on the floor together. Travis showed a little bit from 3 at the end of last season for Stanford, but it certainly wasn't much. And I don't think if you're Kentucky, you really want to embrace that in terms of him being some sort of stretch big man. I think you really want to embrace what he is as a bruiser on the interior. And so for me, I have them at number 2. I might move them up to number 1 simply because I just think they're really good. But I don't think in adding Travis in and of itself made such a huge difference for me. And just looking at the roster, they've got a lot of guards who can handle the ball between Quade Green, Emmanuel Quickly, and Ashton Hagans. They're going to have to work out that backcourt situation. And then off the ball as well, you have Tyler Hero, Keldon Johnson, two guys who are competitors. Hero, excellent scorer. Johnson, kind of a two-way wing. Jamarl Baker is a guy who I think has gotten slept on, who could just give them some spacing. And then you have this up front of Reid Travis, who's a bruising big guy who doesn't really shoot the ball. PJ Washington, bruising big guy, doesn't really shoot the ball. EJ Washington, long stretch big guy who can kind of play inside or out. And Nick Richards, rim protector, doesn't shoot the ball. To me, there's this kind of gap, and you see it on verbal commits very clearly. There's not a single small forward on the roster. Now, obviously, Keldon Johnson at 6'6" could probably play that spot, but there's kind of a gap in terms of they have lots of combo guards who can score the ball, and then they have lots of kind of combo forwards who aren't necessarily true stretch guys, not necessarily true post players. And I don't necessarily know how that all meshes together in modern college basketball. I haven't done enough digging on the shooting of a guy like Ashton Hagans. I'll try to pull up some numbers as we speak here in terms of what he's going to provide from a shooting perspective, because the spacing for me is a big concern. I don't think you want to play Reid Travis and PJ Washington on the floor together. That's kind of my central concern, is how often you want that duo on the floor together. So I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts on that pairing in particular in the front court.
Well, I think that, stylistically is not ideal, as you just mentioned, but I mean, these are two of the best players in the country. I mean, Travis averaged 20 and 9 in the Pac-12, and Kentucky just plucks him out of thin air and throws him onto this team. Even last year there were so many shooting concerns, so many positional concerns, like, oh, you can't, or like you shouldn't want to play Vanderbilt and Washington together, or with Knox is more of a 4 and he's playing the 3. You have Diallo in there who can't shoot. Shai Gilgeous-Alexander didn't take a lot of threes, even though he hit them at a good clip. I mean, you had Sasha and Richards too, who all played. I mean, so Kentucky is not foreign to kind of just putting talented pieces together and it being widely successful. I mean, same with in the platoon days where they were playing Trey Lyles at the 3, and they were doing all sorts of crazy stuff with the lineups. But the guys are so talented, and it's not like too ridiculous of a fit. It's nothing like Duke last year when they were playing Javin DeLaurier at the 3. I mean, Washington and Travis are really going to dominate the glass. It's going to be a real old school feel to this team. And then one other interesting note about this Kentucky lineup: it's really segregated into kind of perimeter versus front court. Like there aren't any guys like a Kevin Knox, like a Trey Lyles that are going to play 3 and the 4. It's pretty much strictly you have your 4s and your 5s, and then you have your perimeter players. And I think that Kentucky's going to have a lot of really interesting lineups. Going with the 2 point guards. I mean, they have Quade Green, Quickly, and Hagans. They're all going to play a lot. They're all going to play in the low 20s in terms of minutes per game at least, and then probably either Harrow or Keldon Johnson alongside them. So this is going to be a pretty interesting roster with just a lot of talent. And even though it has this front court versus back court segregation, I think that they have a lot of pretty versatile pieces, a lot of different lineups that they can construct with this roster.
Yeah, I will say there's one lineup that obviously they're so strong between Montgomery, Washington, and Travis in the front court, and obviously Nick Richards as well has a lot of talent. There's one lineup that I really do hope we see. I'm hoping to see a Quickly, Hagans, Hero, Johnson, and then either Washington or Travis, where you play Keldon at the 4. And obviously you could do Quade in that lineup. You could play Jamarl Baker. I would really enjoy seeing at least a couple of times Calipari throw Keldon Johnson out there as a small ball 4 and just blitz you with guards and then space it out for one big, because Reid Travis or PJ Washington getting one-on-one post catches would be so dangerous, especially Reid Travis gained a better feel as a passer as the season went on last year. He could do a lot with passing out of the post. I really think that lineup could be intriguing, but as you said, I feel like they're really missing that Kevin Knox or Trey Lyles piece. I feel like that'd be the perfect swingman for this roster that would allow them to play small at times, allow them to play bigger at times. If they could have added a guy like that, back into the mix. And it does make you think back to when Kevin Knox was considering staying in school for one more year, what that could have meant for this Kentucky roster.
I mean, EJ Montgomery's kind of that guy. He can shoot from the perimeter. He has some ball skills. But I do agree that they could use someone who's a little more functional at the 3 position. As much as a small lineup kind of looks appealing, I think it's way more likely that Calipari is going to run out more traditional lineups. I think Quade Green is really being slept on here. I mean, this is a former 5-star recruit, and it's not like he had a disappointing freshman, or maybe it was a disappointing freshman year, but it wasn't a inept freshman. I mean, he averaged like nine points a game as a freshman, and he averaged, not being the primary point guard. He shot 38% from 3 on 41 made threes. So I mean, he's going to play. They definitely need his shooting. Kentucky players who come back for like their second or a third year are always extremely valuable. That experience really shows on a team that's always so young. And this isn't like a Dominique Hawkins or a Derek Willis guy in terms of experience. This is a super talented, super highly regarded player who I think is really going to prove a lot of doubters wrong next season.
Yeah, I definitely agree on Quade. I will say, with the small ball, I think part of that is just me. I've really soured on any lineup that's playing 2 non-shooters at once to a point in which I just overly, I think, in some cases, devalue the team, especially for a team like Kentucky, where those 2 bigs might be 2 of the 7 to 10 best bigs in college basketball. I think Kansas's roster construction is a little better suited in my eyes for modern college basketball, especially when you play Lawson at the 4. But at the same time, I do think you do have to embrace, as I think about it, some of this is a natural talent that this Kentucky team will have. So I'm certainly looking forward to watching them play. I think I'm still going to leave them at 2, Brad, but I'm pretty close to jumping over towards your side at number 1.
So who do you have at 1? Do you have Kansas or Gonzaga?
I have Kansas. I don't think Gonzaga is the number 1 team in the country. I don't honestly think. I think the hype for them has taken off a little too fast beyond, say, what Nevada should be. I see them as pretty similar teams.
Because I think that Gonzaga is reasonable to put as number 1 under the kind of assumption that you're trying to predict the end of the year AP poll, because Gonzaga plays like 20 games that they have like no chance of losing, or maybe like 16 games, right? So they're always going to have this kind of bloated record. And when ranking teams, it's so hard to move a team down like Gonzaga, who hasn't lost since like January or even December. And when you have these teams in the top 5 that are, maybe losing on the road to an NCAA tournament team, but they're going to have 5 or 6 losses, and Gonzaga is going to sit there at 31-3 at the end of the season. It's very hard not to have a team like that very, very high up in the rankings. Then in terms of Kansas, one of the reasons why I think I have them all the way down at 6 is, we had mentioned this a couple podcasts ago, but I watched Quentin Grimes play in that U18 tournament. I was not impressed at all. And it almost felt like I was watching a different tournament than everybody else. Because I saw Mike Schmitz tweet about how well Grimes played. Grimes was like the 6th or 7th pick in the early 2019 draft on ESPN. It just felt like I was watching a completely different tournament than everyone else. So that's something I'm going to watch, and scrutinize very intently this year. Grimes and his play, and if he turns into more of like a Malik Newman or a Trayvon Duvall, who they're in the lottery, they're in the top 10, or like a Harrison twins too, to start the year. And then when they start playing, the evaluations sort of come back to earth, and you see more of like a 2nd round pick.
Yeah, I think it is helped in terms of Grimes. He had a really big game in the championship that a lot of people were watching, maybe didn't tune into the entire tournament. I know you were pretty locked in the entire time. And obviously with Kansas, I look at the starting lineup of, say, Devon Dotson, Marcus Garrett, Quentin Grimes, Dedrick Lawson, and Udoka Azubuike. and I like the way that should play together. Obviously, Charlie Moore could be in that, maybe as a six man. You're going to get some shooting from Sam Cunliffe, reserve big guy like a reserve wing like KJ Lawson, and then bench depth with Silvio De Sousa and Mitch Lightfoot up front, as well as David McCormick. I think that lineup fits together just in my personal taste for modern college basketball. But I think in talent alone, I think Kentucky's lineup would be far superior.
I think it is. Yeah. I totally agree in terms of talent. Kentucky's better. I also wanted to point out that Kansas lineup really doesn't have a lot of shooting. I mean, Marcus Garrett is not a shooter, obviously. Udoka Azubuike's not a shooter. Lawson is a capable shooter. His percentages were pretty low. I think it was 28%, but I mean he's a better 3-point shooter than that. And then Dodson and Moore can both shoot the ball, so they could play a lot together. I know that Cunliffe, he was really bad last season at Kansas, even though he has shown to be a capable player during his time at Arizona State. I don't know why he regressed so much. And then KJ Lawson isn't a great shooter. And then Grimes, from what I saw in that tournament, he's not a great shooter either. He's more of like a capable shooter, kind of a low 30% is kind of the vibe I get off him. So this Kansas team could have a underreported shooting woes.
Yeah, I definitely do agree there. I think there's like a lot of just I think a lot of it is just really, preference. I think a lot of people have jumped on the like Lawson is the best player in the country thing, or top 5. And if you believe that, I think believing Kansas to be the number 1 team in the country is pretty fair. And I'm starting to believe that because I think he's going to be awesome. But like, just out of curiosity, Brad, where do you think Dedrick Lawson is in terms of best players in college basketball next season?
Yeah, I was just trying to think of that now. He's certainly up there. I have a top 40 sit-out transfer article that I just finished yesterday. It should be coming out tomorrow. I have him number 1, obviously. I mean, it wasn't even close. We talked about that on the podcast a couple weeks ago. I mean, his competition would be, a bunch of kind of breakout sophomore guys. Like, maybe if you think like Chris Wilkes has a breakout year, or DeAndre Hunter, or Nikhil Alexander Walker, Jonte Porter is a possibility. Those are more of like prospects that they could have like a big jump. It's kind of.
Do you think RJ Barrett's better than him?
I was actually watching some RJ Barrett today in that China versus Canada game from like 3 or 4 days ago. The thing with Barrett is, I mean, he looks like a perfect small ball 4, and he's going to play like the wing. He didn't really show too much of a jump shot in that game. I know that he's shown that in the past, especially in that U19 tournament last year. I think Barrett is probably better. The problem is I haven't seen Lawson play since Memphis. I mean, he could come back and be a totally new player off his redshirt year. So, I mean, as of right now, I'm kind of leaning toward Dedrick Lawson. I mean, who else would even be in contention? I mean, the guys that I just rattled off, they don't really do it for me. Maybe like I can't believe I almost just said that Shamori Pons would be like in the mix for play on the country. But I mean, this is where we're at right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that we do have to keep in mind is like how much did Dedrick Lawson really contribute to winning at Memphis, and how much of his statistics and what he was able to do on the floor was a product of the Memphis team he was on just not necessarily being very good. I mean, the guys on that team around him were Markel Crawford, who is a nice bench shooter, KJ Lawson, who I'm personally not that high on. This is the sophomore team that he had his super year on. Jeremiah Martin, who broke out this year, but he wasn't that good that season. And that's pretty much like it in terms of great players. Jamario Rivers gave him some minutes. Craig Randall, who's transferring to Duquesne, was a rotation guard. Same with Keon Clergio, who's going to UMass. Chad Reikioik, who is a guy, like a highly touted recruit at one point in his career, never really panned out. He was on that team. Like, this team had very little in terms of talent. And so Lawson was kind of thrust into this position of point center, where he was blocking shots, stuffing the stat sheet on rebounds. Like, he had like several games of 12 or more rebounds when I was just looking through his game logs. He got to shoot pretty much as he wanted. 46% from the field is pretty solid, but at 6'8", 6'9", his strength, he's able to pretty much do whatever he wanted on the floor. I don't think he'll have that flexibility at Kansas, and so from that perspective, I think we may not see this perfect Dedrick Lawson that we saw at Memphis, because that perfect Dedrick Lawson doesn't really contribute to winning. So I think that's like a fair concept. As for RJ Barrett, he's a guy who, my last memory of watching him like very vividly for more than like a quarter of a high school game, I watched one of his games at one of the national events this winter. I think they were playing University School with Montverde. But my last memory of him is him just tearing apart the entire U.S. team in the U19 FIBAs out in Cairo last year, when he was just absurd. And so that's kind of like the lasting memory for me of RJ Barrett. He's so good in transition, but I don't necessarily know in terms of as a college player how much like a superstar he'll be. I think he's gonna be awesome. I don't know what he'll compare to, say, like a Dedrick Lawson. So it's tough to say. But I think it's a really interesting discussion to see what you think of Lawson is at this level at Kansas next season.
I think Kansas could run out some really interesting lineups with KJ at the 4 and Dedrick at the 5. But I mean, looking at this roster, I mean, you need to find minutes for Azubuike. Silvio De Souza came on strong toward the end of last year. Who knows if he'll even be eligible? And then David McCormack is another really talented post player center. When I watched him, I mean, it really stood out to me how hard he played, because a lot of guys in that kind of archetype aren't very active or aren't very hard players, and that was something that really stood out to me. But I mean, even just in terms of the conversation of how Dedrick Lawson fits nationally, I mean, I think he's got to be a first-team All-American. Just looking at these other options, I mean, I've taken kind of a little bit more of a deeper look past couple minutes, and I mean, probably Luke May is in the discussion. Probably Ethan Happ, maybe Caleb Martin, but
I mean, I think on paper all those guys are worse than Dedrick Lawson, right?
So do I. Yeah, so that definitely lends credence to the idea that Lawson might be the number one player in the country, and if that's the case, I might be the one with Kansas too low. Maybe he fits somewhere in between 1 and 6. Maybe Kansas is more like the 3rd or 4th best team in the country.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking about how do you even consider guarding a 4 or 5 of Udoka Azubuike and Dedrick Lawson. Udoka Azubuike shot 77% from the field this season. He absolutely can't be stopped one-on-one, and he's going to get every one-on-one he wants when you have, 5 stars around your perimeter and then Dedrick Lawson as like a do-everything 4.
No, absolutely. And I mean, Azubuike obviously has those fouling issues, but I mean, if teams resort to this Haka strategy, I mean, they have 2 other 5-star bigs to go in there. Just an embarrassment of riches there for Kansas.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything more you want to touch on these like top couple teams in college basketball? Just kind of move on to some just more general roster movement stuff we wanted to touch on the show today.
Yeah, I think that does it for Kansas and Kentucky. I think probably the next most relevant topic to college basketball was probably the Middle Tennessee mass exodus from last week. I know we didn't really get a chance to talk about it with our mock draft podcast. But Kevin, what were some of your thoughts about Middle Tennessee losing four guys, including three rotation players, and 2 of those players were the starting backcourt?
I was kind of mixed on this because I think my understanding about Middle Tennessee State was that Kermit Davis was willing to take some kids that were maybe chemistry questions or off the court concerns because he was very good at handling those guys. He'd handled them in the past, and he was willing to, concede some of the control in order to have some of the talent that you wouldn't have otherwise. And I think Nick McDevitt's trying to change the culture. I think he understands that next year's a rebuild, and he's got to change that vision. And perhaps without Kermit Davis kind of running the show, those guys ran amok a little bit. And so from that perspective, it's obviously difficult to lose a player of Antoine Johnson's quality, of Tyreek Dixon's upside. But I don't think this really changes my outlook on Nick McDevitt. I saw some people who were concerned about McDevitt going forward. I think these were all of Kermit's players, and it's just going to kind of speed up the process. He's done a nice job in terms of grabbing a couple of transfers who I think will be pretty good in the Conference USA going forward. DeAndre Dishman from Eastern Kentucky, as well as CJ Jones from Arkansas. So those are two guys who I think are starters, if not, even a little more in college basketball. They have Antonio Green, who's coming in from UT Rio Grande Valley, who is a pretty good piece for them starting out this year. He'll get a lot of shots. So they're going to struggle this year. I think they'll be kind of a bottom tier team in this league. I mean, they still have 5 spots to fill, so there's a chance that they can go get a couple more just pieces to fill out the roster, maybe a grad transfer or two. If I'm a kid who, a mid-level grad transfer, maybe not a Geno Crandall or a Ehab Amin, but a mid-level grad transfer piece, I'm going to go there and get my minutes and get my shots and go get myself paid pro. So I think they have some interesting pitches to make there. But overall, it's going to be a tough year, but it's tough blows there. But overall, I'm not too concerned about Nick McDevitt.
Yeah, I'm not very concerned about the kind of the health of the program or even of the coach. I mean, I thought with Green and Dixon and David Simmons that this was a team that was a dark horse in Conference USA, which may sound strange because of how good that they were this year, but all the talk was going to be of Western Kentucky, and even Old Dominion too has a strong team. I know some people like UAB's roster too, and Marshall. So that's a big four right there. I thought Middle Tennessee with that full complement was right outside that. But now, you mentioned this is a bottom tier team at this point simply because they only have 6 guys for next year. I mean, they have 3 guys sitting out. They have you mentioned Jones and Dishman. Then they also have Reggie Scurry, who's a transfer from Missouri State. Green is definitely their best player. I mean, he hit over 100 threes at Rio Grande Valley. He's going to get a ton of shots. The other guys on the team are all returning players. Donovan Sims, I think, cracked the rotation toward the end of last year, but he was seldomly used. Carl Gamble was the backup center. James Hawthorne was the backup power forward. Both played less than 10 minutes a game. And then Terrence Shelton Schmidt and TJ Massenberg. Massenberg redshirted. Shelton Schmidt was out of the rotation. Just kind of shows you where this roster is right now. And I mean, for the long term, they're fine, but for this year, it's going to be a major step back for a proud program.
Right, and I mean, I think it speaks to they labeled 3 of those 4 departures as dismissals. It speaks to the level with which Nick McDevitt was willing to sacrifice in order to get to a level where he felt comfortable running this program. Antoine Johnson makes you competitive next year, and he's a senior. He's gone in a year. You could have dealt with him for 1 year if you thought what you were going to deal with off the court was manageable. It clearly wasn't to Nick McDevitt, and he's willing to take the lumps on the floor in order to build this culture out. There is one guy they haven't added to verbal commits, Anthony Crump, who just signed today. He's following from UNC Asheville, who's a kind of a long combo wing who could do a lot of different things. I wouldn't have my expectations too high for him, but the minutes will be there. They need a guard. Maybe they can get a JUCO point guard who can just come in and help handle the ball next to Antonio Green. But it's going to be an uphill battle for sure.
Okay, I think that the next biggest piece of news is Nevada has trimmed the roster to 13, so presumably this is the final roster. Josh Hall was the last casualty. He's someone who was their sixth man. He was a long and athletic wing who played a pretty significant role. He is off to Missouri State. I think I saw people citing academic reasons as to why he was the player that was, the last casualty there. So now that this Nevada roster is finalized, Kevin, what do you think the rotation will be? I mean, what do you think the impact of Hall's departure is too?
This was interesting, just on a number of levels. I had heard Josh Hall's name was the casualty, if that's how we're going to put it. A couple of weeks ago, they were just going to let it kind of sit until he had a home lined up that home with Missouri State. That should be a good spot for him. It stinks because it's a guy who Musselman recruited and started this process with, and for him to have to walk off before this Final Four run, that certainly sucks. I'm sure I don't know the details of who said who was leaving, but I can't imagine it was an entirely Josh Hall decision. Just kind of putting that out there. But it's just kind of the game. It was the only guy who could move. In terms of, you couldn't really ask Jazz Johnson or Nizri Zuzua to move on because they'd have to sit out another year when they transferred, and two, they need those guys in a couple of years to go contend. Obviously, a guy like Corey Henson, who would have graduated and transferred, might have been a fit, but they elect to go with Hall, who's a nice player, not necessarily a world beater, and with the depth they have on the wing, it shouldn't be too much of a loss. I'm still thinking a day one lineup of, not knowing Lindsey Drew's health, I'll say Caleb Martin, Cody Martin, Jordan Caroline, Jordan Brown, and Trey Porter, and just go big and athletic and long, and we'll see what happens there. But I think there's going to be some early season feel out from Eric Musselman in terms of what his rotation is. So we'll kind of see what happens there. Wanted to ask you, Brad, real quick, just about Missouri State and what is getting put together out there by Dana Ford and his staff. They're recruiting extremely well. They brought in 3 transfers this weekend. Josh Hall, they brought in grad transfers from Texas Tech, and then they brought in Tulio Da Silva from South Florida, and Josh Webster from Texas Tech, who's a point guard. So this team, they got better and they got deeper. Not really necessarily gearing up for this year, but going forward, I think the future is very bright.
Yep. Missouri State, they obviously did not live up to expectations this year with Alize Johnson's senior year. Part of that was coaching, but they should have a couple of pretty strong players back. I know Obadiah Church was a guy who was a junior this year. He's a shot blocking big man. He was one of their biggest name players per se. And they also have Jared Ritter, who signed with Xavier and transferred before the season even started. He's a shooter. He's a kind of a 2-3 wing type of player. He has to sit the first semester, I believe, and then he'll be eligible to play. So, I mean, this is just a perfect way to build your team. I've always liked Dana Ford, and that Tennessee State team, I watched them challenge Duke. I think that was last year in the non-conference. And I was really impressed with a couple of their guards in that game. And obviously, Tennessee State's center is off to Texas A&M, Christian Mikawolu, who will probably start there. So the Missouri Valley is kind of up for the taking now that Wichita State's gone, and Creighton, obviously a few years ago, had gone. Even though Loyola Chicago is the current favorite, I mean, Illinois State has a good team. Bradley's on their way up. So this should be a much more competitive league than it was when Wichita State was just running over it these past few seasons. In terms of Nevada, I was surprised that it was Hall. I thought Hall was going to play, and Nevada would kind of embrace this wing-heavy lineup. From just a strict just roster and logical standpoint, it probably would have made the most sense for Trayshawn Turman to leave. Second most sense for Corey Henson, because they have a steep competition for minutes, and this is their last season of eligibility. So presumably they would want to play a lot, or even play like a decent amount on a very good team. I could see either one of them being kind of shut out of the rotation here. But just interesting that Nevada would let go of someone who could potentially help them next year too, in Hall, who had two years of eligibility left, versus two guys who only had one.
Yeah, I think for me, what it comes down to in terms of not necessarily feeling as bad is just he's a guy who is the least screwed in terms of transferring. He had several options. I've heard he had plenty of programs calling at both the mid-major and high major level. He's a typical sit one, play two transfer, so he wouldn't have had any problems with eligibility. He just kind of gets to transition into the rest of his career at Missouri State. So wishing him well. Excited to watch this Nevada team and how the roster shakes out. I do think there might be some growing pains. I trust Eric Musselman so much, almost to a fault at this point, that I just kind of believe that it'll all shake out, because it always has. And pretty much since he started coaching in Nevada, everything he said would happen has happened. So I don't really know when to stop believing in him. But at the same time, it does become difficult to figure out what this lineup is going to be, because there is such a stiff change in how they're going to have to play. I know you've discussed this, at length on the podcast about, going from more switchable to just bigger, and we'll see how that kind of works out from here.
Okay, I think that the next biggest story probably happened a few hours ago. That is AJ Lawson to South Carolina. Lawson was on the Canadian U18 team, a former top 50 recruit in the class of 2019. He's reclassified to 2018 and will be joining South Carolina, where I think he's a immediate starter. And I think South Carolina is kind of the dark horse in the SEC in terms of potentially making the tournament. I wouldn't bet on that right now. But Kevin, where do you see South Carolina?
I was talking to Tony Patelis about South Carolina last night. Now, this was obviously before he committed, before AJ Lawson committed. So there is one piece added to the mix that wasn't there. I'm really not sure, where I am, because I really like Justin Minaya. He was a guy who I'd been monitoring before he signed to South Carolina. Went there late. I wasn't sure how the fit was, but he really stepped up and played extremely good basketball last season for them. And so to add him to a year of development on the Frank Martin to the mix, another good wing guard in AJ Lawson, who was very good for Team Canada out at that event. And he's a guy, he's a 2000 birthday. He's still 17 years of age, won't turn 18 until later this month. Evan Daniels said he's ranked as a top 50 player in this class in terms of what he sees it as. But he was a 15.5 rebound guy, adds more length on the wing, little bit of an ability to shoot the ball, shot 44% from three, obviously in a small sample size of that tournament. But very excited to see what the South Carolina team can do. I still feel like there may be 1 to 2 guards from being a surefire NCAA tournament team, but they're going to compete defensively. They're going to scrap. Chris Silva is really good, and between Minaya and AJ Lawson, they should have plenty on the wing.
Yeah, I think point guard play is probably the major concern. They have a couple of steady point guards in Hassani Gervais and Trey Campbell, but they could use another kind of talent boost on the perimeter. I mean, Silva is obviously a all SEC caliber player. Kotsar and Haas are both capable rotation players, and then I really liked what I saw from Alonzo Frank. I think I mentioned that a couple podcasts ago, from his play at the U18s as part of the Dominican Republic team. The front court is awesome. I like Minaya. I think Lawson's going to be probably a double-figure scorer or close to it, but I think that this team is still missing one big-time piece to try to get over that hump in the SEC. But I wouldn't say that this is going to be a fun team to watch, because I think they could participate in some rock fights. They were top 25 defensively in KenPom last season and 161st offensively. So this is a grinded out team that does not operate a very pretty style of basketball, but they should be at least an NIT team, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, point guard's interesting because they have a 4-star in TJ Moss who's coming in, who is one of those kind of, he's in the range of recruit that I don't ever count on as like a starting caliber player. Like if you're looking for a TJ Moss to come in and be, an elite type, recruit, I mean, that's fine and be a development piece as a 3-4, maybe play in the rotation. But if you're looking for him to come in and be a starting type player right away, I just never count on it from a guy in his recruiting range in that 100 to 200 fringe 3 to 4-star. But he's a guy who could help out in the backcourt. Trey Campbell's super solid. But I think just the bottom line, they could use one more guard. They do have one more spot left. I haven't seen any connection to a Geno Crandall, who would be who's the gold standard in terms of a point guard at this point in the process, and as far as at least grad transfers go. There are a few other grad transfer types that they could grab beyond what they already have in what's his name? The kid from Georgetown, Trey Campbell. That's the one. I think Campbell's probably the guy who starts for them day one, though, at point guard. And he just needs to be solid and distribute for because I think you'd go, Campbell, Lawson, Mania, and then two bigs, Kotsar and Chris Silva.
Yeah, so I have the same, except I have Hassani Gervais over Campbell. But I think Campbell's going to probably, play the most out of any of their perimeter reserves. Yeah, Moss and then Jermaine Cousinard are both ranked in between 200 and 215 on the 24/7 composite. I know Cousinard is someone who is more of a late stock riser. I know he had some interest from like Indiana and stuff late in the process. I'm going to be tracking these late stock risers this year to kind of see if teams should gamble on freshmen late in the spring. These type of freshmen that kind of come out of nowhere and then don't gain their high major interest till after the calendar year turns over, or if they should either hold it or just go after a transfer that can maybe help them in the future. In terms of South Carolina's scholarship count, I have them being full right now. I could be off, but
Verbal Commits lists them at 1. I'm not totally sure how accurate that is. They have the 5-man freshman class of Moss, Lawson, Cuisnard, Bryant, and Frank. And then they have Mania, Philip Haas and Jason Cudd in the front court, Jair Bolden and Mike Kotsar as rising juniors, and Gravette and Chris Silva and Trey Campbell as seniors.
Yes, that's 13, right?
Is that 13? Let me see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yep, that's 13. Oh, that's what happened. So when Verbal Commits puts a guy in as like a redshirt senior, even though he's going to stay another year, they have him wiping this. Their system has it wiping the scholarship. So that was the mistake. My apologies on that one, guys.
Yeah, I think it turns over in September maybe, where they knock out the seniors and move the 2018s over to freshmen.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, let's see. I think the next most notable piece of news is a player who's now played at 3 different schools, but he's transferred now 3 times. That is Okoye Gao, who has gone from Louisville to Georgetown to SMU, and then now back to Louisville. He, I think, is the 3rd double grad transfer, along with Cullen Neal, who went New Mexico, Ole Miss, St. Mary's, and then Mauro Sala, who went Mount St. Mary's, Kansas State to Radford. So Gao should add some nice depth to the Louisville front court. I think he's a pretty good player. I didn't see him a ton this year, but from his time at Georgetown, I always kind of liked him and thought he was kind of in a bad situation in terms of a roster crunch because they had Marcus Derrickson and Jesse Govan, who are both future pros. I don't know how Louisville divides the minutes between Malik Williams, Stephen Enoch, and Gao, but I think that this is a pretty good addition.
Yeah, my two favorite parts about the Gao news are not on the floor. My two favorites are number one, he's already completed a master's degree at SMU. He's obviously very committed to his studies, but he has already completed a graduate degree. He'll move forward on a second graduate degree. I hope he's going for some sort of doctorate, because wouldn't that be really cool? If he somehow got, like halfway through a doctorate during his time in college basketball. But the guy's been, around the block. My other favorite part is Georgetown and SMU starting a series this year. Both teams Okoye will have played for during his collegiate career, and he will still be in college. Not sure that has ever happened. But, he's a nice piece. Versatile, plays hard, smart kid. Can play up front and just rebound for you and do a lot of different things. So if you're Louisville, you take him. I don't necessarily get the Matt Stockman interest if we want to touch on him real quick. I don't think he's all that good a player, but Gao fits the role here.
Yeah, I think Stockman's probably headed to Cal, who could really use the center, even though they're probably the 11th best team in the Pac-12. Yeah, I mean, Stockman really Washington State, right?
Yeah, yes. I mean, Cal's not very good either, but
I figured with the addition of Paris Austin and then getting their freshman who played a lot, like Darius McNeil and Justice Suing and those guys back for a second year, I figure it's probably good enough to bump them up to 11th.
Possibly. I mean, Washington State did bring back a Robert Franks after all, so maybe just maybe they keep Cal on the bottom, but that's probably not all that important to debate, is it?
Remember when people were ranking Washington State in the top 25?
That was a fun day.
It's because they absolutely destroyed St. Mary's. I watched that game, and I fell in love with both Malachi Flynn and Robert Franks, but even I wasn't reactionary enough to move them anywhere even close to a projected NCAA tournament, let alone a top 25.
Yeah, this year they pretty much just need a bunch of JUCO guys to hit. They have Ahmed Ali, who's a point guard, Isaiah Wade, who's a combo forward wing, Marvin Cannon, who's a wing, Gervais Robinson, who's a scoring guard. They need like a bunch of those to hit, and then Robert Franks to be just terrific, and then maybe they're okay. They've offered Jordan Lathan. I don't think that's going to happen. We'll see what happens with him. I don't know what college he's going to wind up at this point. I would have thought something would have happened by now. If Jordan Lathan was going to wind up at a D1 school this year, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, he's the best available 2018 recruit by far. I mean, I don't even know if any other potential high major 2018s are even out there. But I think kind of a whip around here of 4 transfers and one guy kind of backing out on his defection. We have Chetty Mosley to LaSalle. He's someone who, when he put out his list originally, it was pretty sure it was Wake Forest, St. Bonaventure, NC State, and URI. And now he's off to LaSalle. He's a former BU guard, kind of a shooter, kind of an undersized combo. And then Jaden Cohee to Canada. I put Canada in my notes. I don't remember which school in Canada he's heading to. But he also had a list of like George Washington, Oregon, Louisville, Xavier, Santa Clara, and DePaul. So those are two immediately eligible guys. What were your thoughts on those couple of commitments?
I mean, mostly just helps LaSalle a little bit, gives him some guard depth. Jaden Cohee is headed to the University of British Columbia, which is a good Canadian program. I spoke to my expert, Tyler Bennett, over at College Court Report. He said that one of the big reasons was that Cohee gets to play with a guy he is friends with from Seattle U. He gets to play with them. And in Canada, he'll get 2 years of eligibility left. So he can play. I'm not sure how the rules work, but I know he gets 2 years. So he can get a full master's degree up in Canada for one of the best programs up there. So I believe that was the logic behind Jaden Cohee heading to a Canadian school. Was pretty surprised because he had the amount of offers in terms of collegiate basketball opportunities in the States, but certainly can't fault the guy for prioritizing, friendship, playing time, and education.
And then 2 more guys who are sitting out. Mayan Kier going from LSU to South Florida. It's a good flyer. for them. I think he was dismissed from LSU, if I'm not mistaken. And then earlier today, Justin Gorham from Towson going to Houston. Houston's been adding a lot of quality players, really building on their momentum.
Yeah, I really like what Houston's doing. Just a good Kelvin Sampson is building the program. He's recruiting pretty well, adding some just solid rotation players. It's tough there because you're just not going to recruit an elite level. Even with the facilities, it's just not a program with enough basketball experience, and there's so much competition for talent in that area. But he's able to just consistently grab these kind of under the radar rotation players. Gorham was a very nice piece at Towson, a 4-man who can do a little bit in pick and roll, bit in pick and pop, handle it a little bit. So nice little 6'7" versatile forward, and you can't have enough of those. So nice piece there.
And then kind of the last existing college player that we kind of want to touch on was David Skara is returning to Clemson. He was going to go pro in Europe. He has switched course. And, I mean, this was Clemson's starting power forward when Dante Grantham went down. Now they have him and Amir Sims back at the 4. This is now a very deep front court for a Clemson team that I think is probably a top 25 team. They're kind of ranked kind of half in the top 25, half out. But the Tigers should definitely be returning to the NCAA tournament in 2019.
Yeah, I really like Skara. He's just kind of that versatile piece that just helps the team. One piece of news that broke while we were on the podcast, Brad, I'm not sure how much you've been on Twitter during the show. It's a couple years down the line, but it's worth mentioning. Michael Foster, who's a 2021 prospect who was committed to Arizona State early. I think he was listed at number 3 in the 2021 class by ESPN's like early 2021 top 60. He just decommitted from Arizona State. He was one of those guys along with Kyrie Walker who committed like super long away during that Arizona State like guard you were the best team in college basketball run. I think most people at the time kind of dismissed it as like a long-term thing, whether it would happen or not, and looks like it may not happen after all.
That's a shame. Hate when these super early commitments never pan out. I'm trying to think of some notable ones. Wasn't Trey Lyles? He was committed to Indiana, right?
I think so. The one I always remember is Eric Bledsoe committing to Ole Miss for like 2 hours. That was a fun one.
I don't even remember that one.
He decommitted like within a day. It was like the worst thing ever.
There was another one too that I was trying to think of earlier. I know for Providence we had this guy Javon Taylor, where his older brother Jaquil Taylor supposedly wanted to commit to Providence, and then we got Bentil and Pascal Chukwu, so there wasn't a spot for him. So they kind of took his brother, who was like a freshman in high school at the time, and he was supposed to grow to 6'7", 6'8", and he was supposed to be this super versatile point guard who was so big, and he didn't grow at all or develop and ended up decommitting last year.
Here's my fan only would know this one. There was a kid, Christian Wilson, who committed out of nowhere on Christmas Day to Siena this year. He was like a JUCO player who had gotten like no playing time. But he was like a 3-year JUCO where he was eligible. After 1 year of JUCO, he was eligible out of high school and just chose to go there to develop his game. He committed, and then like out of nowhere, 2 hours later, deleted the tweet. So like out of curiosity, I texted a source inside the Siena program, inside the staff, and they told me that they had no idea what had happened either, which is always a good one. So that's my funny story of a commitment that didn't last. He's currently still on the board for 2018 if anyone's looking for a combo wing who can shoot the ball and average 23 and 8, and I think NEPSAC Class C as a senior in 2017.
Wow. Yeah, there must be more examples of these players, giving super early verbal commitments. I mean, I know that E.J. Montgomery to Auburn was one, I think, but I think that there are examples of like even earlier, who like when these guys are like freshmen in high school even. But one top 100 2019 kid who committed, I think yesterday or the day before, that's Mason Gillis to Purdue. He's kind of like a power forward who can shoot the ball a little bit, kind of more of like a combo forward. Reminds me a little bit of Isaiah Livers from the limited footage I've seen of Mason Gillis. But he's a solid recruit for Purdue, who's building talent in the post class of 2014 era that did them so well.
Yeah, that's very much a classic Purdue get, like a high-ish upside wing forward, who's not like an elite recruit, but also a very good recruit. So that's kind of my thought on him. I think he'll be a nice piece going forward, and they're pretty excited about him. Speaking of classic recruits for a school, Tyler Wall pops to Wisconsin. He looks like he'll be a nice recruit, fringe top 100 kid, depending on where you look, out of Lakeville North and high school in Minnesota. He's a guy who can kind of play the 3 or the 4, shoot the ball a little bit. So he could be a pretty good piece for Wisconsin. I know he had just gotten a Northwestern offer, Butler offer, Iowa State offers all in the last month or so. So good to see Wisconsin have some recruiting success after some big misses.
Okay, so what did you want to touch on next? Did you want to talk about a little bit who's left, or did you want to talk a little bit about that U17 roster that just came out?
We can touch quickly on who's left, just because I know I wrote on it today. You've got the stuff about transfers coming up as well, so might be a good little lead into what we've written.
Okay, so who do you think is the best grad transfer still available?
I said Gino Crandall. I just think he's so plug and play, and that he's 6'4", shoots the ball 42%, can handle the ball, score 3 levels, defends pretty well as well. I just think he fits on every team in the country. So that's why I put him at number 1.
Yeah, so his list right now, I believe, is Xavier, Gonzaga, Minnesota, and Colorado State. I think Xavier probably needs him the most, and I think they're probably the second best team in that bunch. So that would be a logical fit. I think he probably comes off the bench at Gonzaga. Maybe he starts alongside Zach Norvell and Josh Perkins in that perimeter trio. So both of those are good options. Minnesota, I don't think he starts. I mean, they have Isaiah Washington at the 1, and they have 2 really good wings in Dupree McBrayer, and then a breakout star in Amir Coffey. And they also have Brock Stull, who's a grad transfer coming off the bench. So that's kind of an interesting situation to monitor.
I personally think he's better than Isaiah Washington in terms of as a point guard, but I don't totally think that's fair either way. I think the sleeper in all of this is Colorado State. To me, it doesn't make a ton of sense as a grad transfer destination just because they're not going to be that good. But his high school coach is an assistant there. I believe his name is Dave Thorson. Pretty sure he follows me on Twitter. I'll make sure on that name since he does. But he's a guy he coached at De La Salle High School. Yeah, it's Dave Thorson. He coached at De La Salle High School in Minnesota, which is where Crandall went in high school, and then worked under Nico Medved, who's got a lot of Minnesota ties. He worked under Nico Medved at Drake, and then followed with him to Colorado State. So that's the X factor there. New Mexico State's trying to get involved. I don't know how successful they'll be. I know they work. I think they're like the 5th name on every list you see with them though.
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a logical connection as to why Colorado State's on that list. I know we talked on Matt Stockman, who we're not very high on, but he is getting high major interest. I think the 2 other guys who are getting high major interest are Ehab Amin, the former Nevada commit and former Texas A&M Corpus Christi guard, and then Shedrick Casimir from Iona. I know I've seen Casimir's list. It was like Arizona State, Rutgers, Southern Utah, and then one other team.
Florida Gulf Coast.
What was it?
Florida Gulf Coast.
All right, yeah. So I think Arizona State could use like a 6-man scorer type. I know that they went after Tremaine Isabel Rutgers, I guess they could use them. I mean, I don't really know why Rutgers would want to be adding graduate transfers in their kind of long-term rebuild, but those are the two other names out there.
For me with Casimir, it's as much as just he builds a culture. If you're Rutgers, this is a guy who's been to 3 straight NCAA tournaments. Everyone I've spoken to around the Iona program just loves the kid. He's worked so hard to come back from hip injuries. That have really taken away a lot of his explosiveness. But he's a 46% shooter from 3. He's a great spot up guy. If you're Rutgers, if you have the scholarship, you might as well take him. He's small, but he could play next to like a Geo Baker because Baker's kind of big for a point guard. You could play him and have Casimir guard ones. Casimir just gives you a little extra floor spacing and leadership, which that team could definitely use. So we'll see if he goes there. One grad transfer name, I don't know if he's going to go high major because I think there's just a lot of questions about what he is in terms of health and just everything. But Adonis De La Rosa, he's coming off an ACL, but he's kind of journeyed through college basketball from St. John's to JUCO, Kent State. And last year he was 25 minutes a game, 12 points and 7.5 rebounds. Like he's super efficient in the post. He might be worth a shot for somebody. I don't know.
I mean, St. John's really needs a backup center. So that could be an interesting Okoye Gal situation. I don't think that will actually happen. But another name that I've not heard mentioned with any teams, high major or not, and that's Jalen Patterson, former LSU point guard. He's a capable player. I think he could go high major if the interest was there. I know Oregon State and Seton Hall really need a point guard, and adding a point guard could really elevate those two teams in their respective conferences. Kind of like the Joe Chartouni thing, where it's not necessarily how good the player is, but how he fits with the roster. And getting a pure point guard on either of those teams would definitely be beneficial.
Yeah, I think I've kept putting him on my list of like best available grad guys. But part of me definitely thinks that there's a possibility he doesn't ever return to college basketball. Obviously, sat out this past season voluntarily, just because of the lack of buzz. It feels like to me he might not return. Just my gut feel. I don't know anything inside there.
Okay, and then in terms of sit out guys, probably the best one available is Zane Martin from Towson. I've seen his list too. His list was Gonzaga, Seton Hall, Clemson, and I don't remember the other team.
New Mexico snuck on the list after Maryland and Ole Miss got official visits, so that's interesting enough.
And now Clemson is full with scholarships, I believe, after David Scarr has returned. I think Seton Hall has either one or two available, but Martin is certainly talented enough that they would risk not taking a flyer on like a subpar point guard just to kind of have some insurance there. Martin is an impact high major player when he would be eligible next season.
Yeah, Martin is it's so funny because Towson had a big international trip to Canada last year, and I got tagged in a bunch of their tweets, so I kept looking at the stats and whatever, and he kept putting up just absurd stats. He was averaging 15, 20 a game on this trip. He averaged like 5 a game as a freshman. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to put him down as my CAA breakout player of the year. And that one panned out pretty well, averaged 20 a game. So hoping he can prove me right again. I hadn't heard New Mexico at all connected to him. So it's interesting that they service on the list late. Another sit-out guy, Trey Jefferson from Texas Southern. This is the name that just popped out. He's been tweeting a bunch of cryptic stuff about the old Texas Southern staff, like saying bad things about him when he's looking at schools. I don't know how much is truth to it. I just figured I'd mention it. But he's super talented. He's a 23-point a game player this year. I don't know where he winds up. I know there's been talk about him following Mike Davis. There's been talk of some other different spots. We'll see what happens. Yeah, he tweeted some stuff about how there's a bunch of false ass rumors on his name. made multiple tweets about saying he never ever was a drug dealer. He was too busy chasing a dream. Um, all my life I was supposed to be a drug dealer. Well, I've been selling the wrong shit because I'm still broke AF. World believe anything. One man army. I really mean that. Whenever I'm ever accused of something, I go and just do so you can be true with yourself. Bunch of really cryptic tweets. He's been all over Twitter today. So I don't know what the deal is in terms of allegations, but the talent's there. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, so then we touched upon Tyreek Dixon and Antoine Johnson from Middle Tennessee State. I think the two other guys to mention, Jalen Johnson from St. Louis, averaged like nine points a game, I believe, as a sophomore last season. He's like a shooter, combo forward. And then Bryson Williams from Fresno State. He is a big man. I saw that he visited Oregon a couple weeks ago. Oregon has a bunch of scholarships available, so that seems like a logical fit there. I don't know what the potential holdup is. Maybe it is a kind of playing time projection issue, or maybe it's something entirely different.
So I did some research on him today, just for my story. I had him at number 5 on the total top trend transfer still available. He has visited UTEP, Oregon, and a recent visit to Arizona as well. And meanwhile, he's still left open the possibility that Fresno State, he could return there. As recently as a week ago, Justin Hudson was talking about recruiting him back. So maybe that's the holdup, is he hasn't decided whether he wants to stay or go. UTEP's where I've been rooting for him to land. Not sure if that will happen. One other guy I just wanted to mention. Actually, we'll go with 2 guys. Why not? Justin Roberts at DePaul. Watched him against Seton Hall in person. Was super impressed. Dave Lato kept saying that he made a bunch of freshman mistakes, but all I saw was him score like 12 points in 10 minutes and nearly single-handedly bring them back into that game. So his minutes were limited, maybe unnecessarily, and as a result, he transferred. He's a guy who could be a steal for maybe a mid-major late in the process. And then Najee Hunter. This is kind of a deep dig for me. He's a Brooklyn native, went to St. Benedict's Prep in New Jersey, went to Rice last year and was pretty much nothing most of the season. And in the last 4 games of the year, he averaged 19 points and 5 rebounds, shooting 40-something% from 3. So I think he's a guy where like a MAC or a CAA school could grab him coming closer to home and him wind up being an all-conference type.
Yeah, that's a great find with Hunter. I mean, that's the perfect type of player if he's willing to be a role player for a high major school to kind of take, and him be like a quality bench player or like a kind of glue guy starter for years to come. I know with Providence, they've had success doing that with Junior Lamamba a few years ago, who put up like 5 or 6 points a game at Cleveland State, but was an impact defender, a versatile defender who drew a lot of tough assignments. And then Isaiah Jackson, who's been pretty good for them these past 2 seasons, again averaged I think like 7 or 8 points a game at George Mason. Guys who, when the transfer list comes out, you don't even notice, but then they end up making a pretty substantial impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Those are just kind of the late steals. Anyone else you wanted to touch on the show before we wrap this one up?
Did you just want to talk about the U17 roster first?
Sure, let's touch on that one real quick.
So this roster is absolutely loaded with 2019 and 2020 recruits. I mean, I think every player except for Davion Harmon, Romeo Weems, and Isaac Okoro are all top 15 recruits. And those 3 guys I just mentioned are all in the top like 40 of the class of 2019. I mean, I have no idea how they'll divide up the minutes, but Team USA is going to run through this tournament.
Yeah, they're going to crush it. I'm just generally looking forward to a lot of FIBA stuff this summer. I'll be watching some Euro qualifiers later this week, just because there's 1 or 2 international guys I have my eye on, including new Siena commit George Darvish, who's a Romanian player, 19 years old, who's starting for the Romanian national team. So I'll try to get my hands on some footage that way. It was a bit hard to come by. So just looking forward to a lot of FIBA stuff this offseason. That USA team, though, should absolutely blow things out of the water and should give us a chance to evaluate some of these future classes that we're not necessarily sure about after a down 2018 and 19 recruiting groups.
So I think that they have the top 5 players in 2020. Jalen Suggs, Jalen Green, RJ Hampton, Scotty Barnes, and Evan Mobley. I know Evan Mobley was rated number 1 in the class of 2020 on ESPN, and he might be their third string center behind Vernon Carey, who's the number 2 player in 2019, and Isaiah Stewart, who I think is like the number 8 or 9 player in the class of 2019. I mean, I just can't get over how loaded this group is. I mean, they have Wendell Moore, who's a top 15 player in the class of 2019. I think he's probably Duke bound. And then I've seen a lot of good things about Jeremy Roach, who's a top 20 player in the class of 2020. He's a kind of a trend, like a pace setter, floor general type.
I think the one thing that's held back in the past of guys getting to come to these events is just Peach Jam and other recruiting events. Like a guy like Isaiah Stewart, I read, is going to be flying directly from the U17 event to Peach Jam to play for the City Rocks. So that might be a situation where just the timing lines up where these guys can both play there and then come up to Peach Jam. So it works out just for a busy summer, but an exciting one for these guys.
That is, pretty important to note, because Harmon is already committed. He's headed to Oklahoma. Romeo Weems is headed to DePaul. Evan Mobley's dad is an assistant at USC. And then the rest of these guys are all, such high recruits that they're not really competing to be recruited at all. So I mean, that's probably part of the reason why they were all so willing to participate in this event as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good call there.
So I think that does it for tonight.
Yeah, I think so too. It's been a fun one. When we were planning out this pod, I wasn't totally sure if we'd have enough for some riveting conversation, but I really liked our beginning about Kansas and Kentucky and that debate, and then we got into some really good stuff with player movement. So glad we recorded this one. Brad, you want to just flesh out some of our plans for the coming weeks as we get into true off-season content?
Yeah, so we're hoping to do at least once a week, probably once a week. So like the new structure of the podcast will be maybe the first 15 to 20 minutes or so, and we would really stick to this, would be like the current news, and then we would do 20 minutes to a half hour on just one specific team, and doing a real deep dive that you wouldn't find on a podcast that covers the sport nationally. It would be more of like a more local or more biased angle. We think by doing one or two 20 to 30 minute breakdowns on a specific team, we'll be able to provide a lot of detail and a lot of insight on these teams that a national podcast can't.
Yeah, I'm super excited about this. I'm gonna seek your guys' input in terms of what teams you guys want to hear about and what things you want to hear. I mean, obviously we'll have things like projected lineups and things like that, but what types of analysis you guys are looking for. We're going to try to go as deep as we can. Maybe take a couple of questions about teams that we can answer. That's all stuff we're going to work out the kinks as we go. But we're certainly excited about it and looking forward to some good off-season content.
Absolutely. I'm thinking maybe not all like the top teams. Maybe we'll sprinkle in some teams that are more bubble mixed with like a team that's a top 10 team or something. Just the more interesting and the more up in the air your lineup or like the more questions you have, probably the more chance your team gets mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. We're looking forward to it. Thanks for listening as always, everybody, and have a good night.